Tourism is a vital part of Minnesota's economy. According to Explore Minnesota's latest report, more than 80 million people visited the state in 2023, spending $14.1 billion and generating over 180,000 jobs. Our guest today says that to keep that part of the economy strong, we need to protect our environment and lakes from climate change. And he's introduced several bills this session to further that goal. Joining me now is the DFL senator who represents Senate District 4, Senator Rob Kupec. Senator, thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Now, Senator, you joined a new group this session, which was the Blue Dog Coalition, which aimed to elevate rural or greater Minnesota voices and issues. So what are those issues, and do you think the coalition was successful?
Yeah, I think, we have kind of informally been that coalition, and I think this year to kind of maybe formalize it a little bit more, set up regular meetings and have discussions. I think it's been really helpful. And we have a couple of members that are, closer to the Twin Cities too. So it's been kind of a nice mix. But I think, sometimes things that play a one way in the 7-county metro don't necessarily play the same way out into greater Minnesota. And so I think just having that lens to look at things through a greater Minnesota viewpoint, I think has been very helpful. And I think having more of us together kind of educates more of our colleagues on what we're thinking.
Something you've talked about often are climate concerns, and some of the legislation you've supported this session really seeks to further that. One being the push to further develop Minnesota's sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF industry. So what is SAF, and why should Minnesota get involved, or why are we a good spot for this?
Sure, we in some ways are the almost perfect spot for this. So sustainable aviation fuel, think of it as the jet equivalent of biodiesel, right? It's sustainable aviation fuel that has at least cuts carbon emissions by 50%. And this is kind of the toughest nut to crack within the transportation realm, is how do you cut emissions from airplanes? You can do electric cars, batteries are heavy things. That's not exactly what you want on an airplane. Airplanes need to be light to fly. So sustainable aviation fuel, if we can cut those jet emissions by that much, that's a huge leap forward. And it's made with all the things that we make in Minnesota. So it's a new market for our farmers, and even our timber industry. Actually, wood waste products are a huge work really well to make sustainable aviation fuel. So that's one of the areas I think is the best. So the combination of us being a huge agricultural state plus having a huge airport in Minneapolis-St. Paul makes us the perfect spot to do this. And we've been a leader in sustainable aviation fuel, and I think, we want to make sure we continue that.
And so that bill that you had for that, Senate File 1312, which was bipartisan, you called it a win-win for the aviation industry and our farmers. So what kind of response did the bill receive from those industries, and where does that bill stand now?
Yeah, a really good one. So, I mean, farmers, Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, all supportive of that. Delta has been a huge leader in this area too. That's really helped us here in Minnesota, the fact that we're a hub. And I did co-present it with Senator Jasinski. It's actually Senator Rest is the chief author, so it really is a good bill. So what that does is we've been the leader, but other states have looked and gone, hey, Minnesota's given this tax credit. We can match that tax credit. So what we want to do is extend out the life period of that tax credit. That sends the message to industry that, we're really serious about this. Plus, we changed a little bit too. We made the tax credit a little bit more if you can make that carbon score go even higher than the 50%. And so that's also kind of an incentive towards industry to move in another direction. Plus, in my district, they're looking at building one of these sustainable aviation fuel plants in Moorhead. It'd be great for the city. They're looking at possibly about 600 jobs that would come with that plant. Plus, all our farmers in the area, that's a new market for them to sell their crops to. So it is a win-win situation.
Love those. You also put forth a bill that would establish a license plate for our solar pollinator programs. Obviously, we know what pollinators are, but what is a solar pollinator program? And talk to me about how the license plate can help with those efforts.
Sure. So the idea of a solar pollinator, and this is also something like the University of Minnesota at Morris is working on, where for agricultural, like for livestock too. So with that at Morris, they take the solar panels and they raise them up a little bit higher. So then the cattle or sheep or goats can come in and graze around that and then use the solar panels as shade. Cows like to get out of the sun in the summer just like we do, look for a little bit of shade. So that also kind of a win-win situation. So you keep that in some kind of agricultural use, but then get the benefit of also having solar panels on it. So the same idea with the pollinators is that you, around the solar panels, put in flowers that are, that bees like to go to. You get honey production out of that, and that's when. So the pollinator program was set up several years ago, but never had kind of any dedicated funding to it. And I think when we're looking at a year where there's some tighter budgets, I think they thought, well, this is an interesting idea. We'll make the license plate. If people get that license plate, the funds from that go towards that program. So in a way, it's a way to self-fund that program and also spread the message on cars all over the state of solar pollinators.
Yeah, it's a nice way to get the message out and to support that program. So we know that you cover climate concerns, and weather events have become more severe over recent years. You want to help meteorologists forecast these events so they can warn their communities so people can be safe ahead of time. And so you pushed for additional radar to improve public safety. Talk to me about the need for this legislation, which has been called life-saving, and the bill's current status.
Yeah, so this one's a little bit, this is a tough one. So the bill, out in western Minnesota particularly, and there's other places in the northeast part of Minnesota too, but there's a weather radar by the National Weather Service between Fargo and Grand Forks in Mayville, and then the next ones are Duluth and Minneapolis. And so when that radar beam leaves the radar site, it travels in a straight line. Well, the Earth curves, and then that beam, as it gets further away from the radar site, becomes higher and higher and higher in elevation. And so when you get into places like Alexandria, Minnesota, up through Park Rapids to Bemidji, that radar beam from both Mayville and from the Twin Cities is so high, you will miss things at the ground. So I worked as a meteorologist for 20 years. I can think of lots of times in my career where there were suddenly tornado warnings for things that we could not see on the radar, but that somebody had confirmed on the ground. And so the bill I had basically would give money out for bids for companies to come in and fill in that gap from the private industry with radars. There's one company that's doing this. They've already put one up in Wendell, Minnesota. That's kind of prime spot right within that gap to do that. And really they would go out to bid, but what the companies are looking for is they want to make sure that there's some kind of return on investment. And they know that if the state is going to purchase that data, make it available to the public, that they would have that. Unfortunately, in a very tight budget year that comes through the judiciary, which is worried about making sure our correction officers, we have funding for our jails, our court system has the funding up and running. In a tighter budget, they did not have the extra funds to go forward. So great idea, will remain on the table. We'll bring it back in a different budget session or find a new way to fund it. But I still think some of that work will go forward, probably just not as fast as we'd like it to.
Well, forgive the pun, but you put it on the radar. So
right.
It's a place to start.
Well played.
Thank you. Right. So you also authored Senate File 1690 to make recycling electronics less expensive by shifting the cost from consumers to manufacturers, and it was said the program would be self-funding. So talk me through how that works.
Sure. Right now, if you, depending on where you are in Minnesota, it varies by county, but you say you have a television set and you show up at the recycling center and you do the right thing and you bring it and they say thank you, and then they hand you a bill, $25, maybe over $100 to recycle that. And then I think some people are like, that's interesting, and then maybe they take that back and it doesn't end up. It ends up somewhere either falling off the back of a truck in a ditch or into a dumpster somewhere. And then the counties, who are the responsible agents in most areas for picking up recycling, they still got to now recycle that TV. They didn't get the funding for it. And particularly in greater Minnesota, most of our electronic waste has to get shipped to the Twin Cities. So there's a trucking cost and a shipping cost that come along with that. So the idea behind this bill was to see how can we find more places so that people make it more convenient to recycle their electronics, and also get some more money back to our counties, particularly in greater Minnesota, which are losing money on electronics recycling, because these are not things we want in landfills. They're not things we want in our garbage incinerators, and there's valuable metals in there that we could use to make new electronic devices. And particularly when you're looking at we want to decarbonize our economy, we need all those precious metals that we can get out of that. So the idea, last year after we talked with some retailers, because we had this plan last year, but it would have put money right at the point of sale on consumers. They said more other states have put this back on manufacturers, kind of as like, you're producing this, you're making this waste, you have some responsibility for it. And so the idea was to shift that money back onto those producers to come up with that. Right now it is in the Environment Policy Omnibus Bill, still not sure whether that has a path forward. We're very focused on a budget, so policy is like a great thing, but right now we want to make sure that by July 1st we have a new budget in place so that the state remains open and functioning. So we will see, but might be another one of those like next year great idea thing in a policy year.
Yeah, fair enough. So, that might be held over. What other ideas are you hoping to see happen in Minnesota, this session, next session, into the future when it comes to green initiatives?
Yeah, I think, we've taken a lead. I think our 2040 plan, to make all of our energy renewable by 2040, I think that is a great step forward. Transportation is going to be the next area that's probably a little bit harder to crack into, particularly thinking about greater Minnesota. Electronic vehicles, the ones that have good range that work in greater Minnesota, those cost a lot of money, well beyond where the average consumer can purchase them. So hopefully that technology comes along. But I think, in my district, the city of Moorhead has already met these 2040 standards. They do it by, using RECs to buy back some of the electricity that is still produced by coal. And that's exactly the way our 2040 plan works. So I always say, look, Moorhead has already accomplish this. It can be done statewide. We want to make sure, that electric rates stay as low as they can. The problem is going to be, making sure we also keep our base load going for that, particularly with data centers coming online that use a lot of electricity. The demand for electricity will go up. So I think those will be the challenges we'll have to look forward to meet, of how do we keep our electricity producing green while meeting that base load demand.
Congratulations, Moorhead. That's a great achievement. What would you say has been your greatest achievement this session?
I think I have two bills that I'm really proud of. I had the first bill that made it through both the Senate and the House and signed by the governor. And it doesn't sound like a super exciting, sexy bill, but it was about grain buyers. And this was actually a bill that I had last year that got kind of knocked out in a conference committee, but there was a constituent, and basically these small grain buyers who don't do a lot of money, they have to go and get full CPA audits, sometimes costing tens of thousands of dollars when they are not doing a lot of money. So the grain buyers bill, what it did was said, okay, smaller grain buyers, we still want some check, but you can use a tax attorney, somebody like that, to look over your books. Larger grain buyers, yes, you still need to do the full CPA audit. And particularly, there was one person in my district who was a small grain buyer, and he was just like, I have an $18,000 CPA bill. I don't make enough money to cover an $18,000 CPA bill. So that was one of those things where it's like, this is a really good fix, and it actually, directly impacted one of my constituents. That was a good win. And then the other one is another bill that I worked bipartisanly on with Senator Dornick. Last year, we passed a bill around broadband. We've got lots of money coming in from the federal government, and we put some safety requirements in place of 40 hours of training. Well, the industry said, look, we don't know that we can meet all of that training and get the job done on time to make sure we get all the federal money we've got coming in. And we want that federal money, and we want to get broadband to as many people as we can in Minnesota. And so with Senator Dornick, the two of us met with labor and industry and kind of came to some agreements. We pushed the start date back for that effective date for when those requirements had to come. That was a big thing because we pushed it back into the winter. They're not being able to put things in the winter. They can focus on training then. That gives them this summer to roll ahead on that. And also did recognize that we do need that training, but did provide some, if you've had the training recently, some requirements. So it's not all 40 hours of maybe something that's repetitive, kind of fitting in some of those things that you've already learned, giving credit for those. And so kind of a win-win situation. I think it was really good to see labor and industry come to some kind of agreement. I think Senator Dornick and I just kind of were shepherds in that process. But and then we did pass that also along to the House as a standalone bill because there's a July 1st date. We want to make sure that we get that date moved back to January so that this summer, not only the construction can go on, but the people who have to enforce it know what the rules are going to be.
All right. Senator, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a lot of fun.
Fantastic.